if you could all stand with me and say the Pledge of Allegiance. All right. This particular meeting has a first item that's unique, and it is time for the annual reorganization of the board. And with that reorganization, we will elect a new president. And so I will turn over control of the meeting to our superintendent.
Great, thank you. This is a new moment for me in my role as superintendent to support this transition. So I first and foremost want to acknowledge and appreciate Ann Moore for her service as president of the board. And I have a specific commemorative gavel to honor and celebrate you and your role and your leadership. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. That is very nice. Very nice. I appreciate that. Thank you.
So I'm in a moment of power for, a very short time, but I'm going to move us along to get to the annual reorganization. So I'd like to ask for any nominations for board president.
I would like to I nominate Sydney Mullings.
All right. So Sydney Mullins has been nominated for board president. Are there any more nominations? All right, I'll ask one more time to give wait time. I'd like to call to see if there are any other nominations for board president. All right, well, I will consider the nominations closed right now, and I'll move us towards a roll call vote to officially name Sydney Mullins as the next board president, and I will start at the end, far away from me. So I'll call out each board member name to start. Marnie Moraldo.
Sydney Mullings.
Sydney.
Sydney Mullings.
Director Suzanne Weaver.
Sydney Mullings.
Director Ann Moore.
Sydney Mullings, and I'm going to point out, and I should have pointed this out at the very beginning of the meeting, that Director Gallinger is not with us today, and so hence why he's not up here and not voting.
All right, well, that's a majority and consensus vote of the members who are here, and I would say that congratulations to Sydney Mullins and her election to become board president effective now. And so we will take a few moments to rearrange seats and before we officially hand the meeting back over.
One? Okay.
Yeah, you don't need to. I just unplug that one, though, so you might want to.
Congratulations, Sydney.
Oh, hit me with it. Advance. What's different?
All right, I look forward to working with the next president here. So I'll turn the meeting back over to President Sydney Mullins.
That's going to be a new sound. Thank you for that. Thank you for the vote of confidence. And Anne, I just want to thank you for leading us, doing a fantastic job for the past year, leading this board. And specifically, I want to call out the role that you played in expertly leading us through our superintendent search. So that can't go without recognition. So thank you, Anne.
Very welcome.
Couple pieces of business before we get back into the meeting that we just need to take care of. Next, after the president and the reorganization, will be identifying the FRN representative, so Federal Relations Network representative. Marnie Moraldo, Director Moraldo is the current representative and can continue in this.
I would like to maintain that, especially as an NSBA board member.
Absolutely. And thank you for representing us in NSBA as well and the National School Board. So thank you. And then the next piece of business would be the election of our legislative representative. That is currently Director Gallinger. Do I have a nomination for LEDREP?
I would like to nominate Director Gallinger, and although he is not here, I did ask him if it was okay to nominate him, and he had said yes.
Well, I support his yes. So should we take a vote again? Do I have to do the
I was
name
going to
call?
say, does that one need a second or?
Does that one need a?
Nominations do not require a second.
Just repeat it.
Just
And you can
repeat it by
ask
the-
if anybody else wants to be.
Does anyone
any other
else want to be
nominations?
the LEDREP? Awesome. Do we need to take an actual vote on this one as well? Okay, well, let's take the vote on Director Gallinger remaining as our LEDREP by name or all together.
Altogether.
All in favor then?
Aye.
Aye. So congratulations to Director Moraldo and to Director Gallinger for continuing to serve in those important capacities. All right, so back to our regularly scheduled meeting. Okay, so the next section on our agenda is public comment. Public comment is the opportunity for the public to give input to the board on items not already scheduled for discussion on the meeting agenda. If you have input for a specific agenda item, I will ask for you to hold that input until I request input at that particular agenda item number. As a general rule, the board will not respond to public input. I ask that you clearly state your name, school attendance area, limit your comments to 2 minutes, and we will use a timer. I have a list of, you got it? Good. Wonderful. I have a list of folks who are here in the room, which I will start with. And then we'll go to Zoom. Stephen, if there's folks who would like to do comment for any, just to make sure you know what's on the agenda for this evening, is we will talk about monitoring ends 2, which is around academics, EL 16, which is equity and the superintendent interpretation of both of those, and then a resolution on a boundary change. So if you have public input on any of those 3 topics, I'll ask that you hold it until we get to those agenda items. Sound good? Awesome. So I will start in the room. And the first person, I think the last name is Van Diepen. J.M. Van Diepen. Okay, if you come up to the mic, I'll give you a couple more instructions. So for public comment, the board neither endorses nor censors any opinions expressed during public input. Please keep all comments civil and respectful, and no comments or applause from the audience. Please feel free to wave your hands in support of the speaker. So you'll have 2 minutes. Yep, you're
Okay.
on.
I'm here to talk about Coach
Your
White.
name and your attendance area, just so we have it for the record. So
Sure.
what school you're close to?
Issaquah High School or Issaquah. And my name is J.M. Van Diepen. Here to talk about Coach White and in his capacity as a leader in our school for our kids. And I can definitely vouch for Coach White in the sense that he has been an asset to especially the football team. My 2 boys that attended the team and the impact that he had on those guys is tremendous. And actually, I feel honored to have him in our lives, basically. I don't know exactly, of course, what happened in that unfortunate moment, and I'm not here to talk about that. But I do strongly feel that, or let's say, strongly urge the board to do as much as possible to show an example of standing up to bullying. I think that would be not only the right thing to do, but also a great example to all the kids in our schools. Yeah, I'd like to leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. The next person is Heather Weeder or Whiter? Weeder. Can you bring it to the end?
Good evening. I am Heather Weeder. I am a middle school math teacher. I teach 6th grade at Pacific Cascade Middle School. And I have been teaching in Issaquah for 22 years. I absolutely love my job. Best thing I could do with my life. I've actually had a few of your children over the years. But unfortunately, I'm here because we are in a desperate situation with our middle school math curriculum. As you can see with the ed report, it received a failing grade. It does not align with Common Core standards. It does not have the rigor, does not have the mathematical practices. It is failing our students in middle school. 5 years ago, we started the middle school math adoption process because school districts recognized that our middle school math program was not appropriate. It is not good. And unfortunately, things have happened. It keeps getting pushed back. And now I'm hearing murmurs that it may get pushed again because of budgetary issues. It's just heartbreaking. And meanwhile, as we are not getting a new math curriculum, we are rolling out a new math class in middle school. We're rolling out the math 1-2, which I absolutely am 100% behind. I love the idea of not skipping content for our 6th graders, but still being able to advance. The unfortunate part is you're asking me to create it out of thin air because the current math curriculum that I have as a resource is inappropriate, doesn't work, and it does not have the resources we need for this. So as you are looking at budgetary issues, please do not push our middle school math curriculum again.
Thank you for your
Thank
input.
you.
Paulette Zimmerman. You can just wait till you get to the microphone so we can make sure we can all hear it.
Paulette Zimmerman with IVE. I'm coming here tonight to speak for my daughter and other little girls that might find themselves in similar situations. Just before Thanksgiving, I was notified by the school of an incident where a boy in my daughter's class said something sexually inappropriate to her, loud enough for several schoolmates to hear. I was surprised to hear this is now starting in 4th grade. We went through the proper channels and met with the principal to understand how, as a parent, I would have confidence in sharing with my daughter a plan in place to address this and that the boy would face consequences. I left the meeting upset and at a loss that I could not tell my daughter anything had been done. While I understand there are confidentiality issues surrounding discipline of another child, I would also share that this uncovered a gap in the disciplinary action or potential lack that exists. My daughter went back to school and less than a week later was bullied again by this individual, back in the principal's office reporting an issue. While the offense was not sexual in nature, my daughter is seeing and being taught that when she raises her voice and asks for help, there's no repercussion. Whether or not action was taken, we have no way to know or reflect that back to my daughter. This might not seem important. It may seem like it's only 4th grade, but I would challenge this. Today, in a corporate setting, these same words this boy spoke would have resulted in termination of the individual's employment and be considered sexual harassment. I'm not blind to the comparison that I'm making between adults and a fourth grader, but that might seem unfair. But what age do we start learning these behaviors and showing our young girls they're not supported? As someone who has worked in large corporate settings my entire career, I can assure you there are plenty of women that do not report instances because they say nothing will happen. It starts now at this age that we see these things, and we should be doing better for our girls to ensure that they see and know when they speak up that consequences happen and someone is taking action. That does make a difference, and I'm here for that. I'm not asking you to break the rules, but I'm expecting that we're saying that we notified your parents isn't cutting it for our girls. We need to set an example so that in the years to come,
If you could please wrap up your comment.
Yep. In the years to come, that asking for help and speaking up when it matters most, that they know that they will be nurtured and supported, and that's the right thing to do. I ask that we do better.
Thank you for your input. Larry White.
For those of you that don't know me, my name's Larry White. And I'd first like to read from the EL 16, which we'll be covering today.
Sorry, that was my
Okay.
mistake.
All right. Item 6 in EL 16 states, promote a workplace environment and culture that supports retaining highly skilled and diverse workforce. And the first bullet, well, it says interpretation. I interpret this to mean the Issaquah School District will. And bullet point 1 is foster a culturally competent and emotional safe work environment, learning culture to enable highly skilled staff who are from diverse backgrounds to thrive and connect as employees of Issaquah School District. As an employee of Issaquah Middle School, I was regularly and repeatedly subjected to racial slurs. Keep in mind what I said, regularly and repeatedly. Why was that okay? As an employee, I thought the district might protect me, especially after the district's own Director of Safety and Security, Dave Montalvo, told HR I was getting abused on a regular basis. None of these things happened. I mistakenly thought that maybe someone from Dama Hood's HR department would check in with me to kind of see, at least or investigate one of the documented cases of hate speech that I had to deal with. We currently have administrators that are more worried about the color of security officers' uniforms than providing the tools and giving them the protection that they need. This is a hostile work environment. The irony is that when I emphasize the racial slurs to HR, they actually had the audacity to tell me, oh, we believe you, but yet nothing was done. Why was that okay?
Thank you for your input. William Reynolds.
William Reynolds, Issaquah High School. My son Luke is a student there. I'm here in support of Larry White. What I'd like to say is my wife and I have a good friend who's a teacher at IMS, and she's expressed the concern that she's been referred to by the N-word and FU, and would state that she feels it's a hostile work environment, but nothing's really been done. To her testimony, she said that Larry has come to her aid several times when she was in a difficult situation and facilitated the calming down, neutralizing of the situation. The other thing I'd like to bring up is Larry's character. Directly, our personal experience is what he did for our son. And he was very compassionate, kind-hearted, mediated our son getting on a, he would work with kids in coaching, and he mediated our son getting on a select baseball team when there was some trouble where he didn't find his own niche. He was on Issaquah Baseball Club, but then he didn't find a team after that. Larry was the one that facilitated that. Whenever he'd see us, wherever he was in town, my wife would bump into him and he'd always have a good word to say. But he's a kind, compassionate man, and I think he's been mistreated. I think he's been in this environment that's hostile. But I'd like to on one last word. Oh, I got 38 seconds. Is to say that my son says that he's like a second father to him. He's very concerned. He would come over. He plays for Issaquah High School baseball team. He'll be varsity this year. And he would come over late in the day after he's done with work and kind of watch the games and give Luke a good word. But he's a good man. I hate to see what's happening to him happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your input. Was there a third page? No. Is there any other input in the room on items not on the agenda? Items not on the agenda? Okay, if you could come up to the microphone, please, and state your name and attendance area. And remember all those good rules I shared earlier about civility.
Of course. My name is Tina Pereira Smith, and I'm actually a substitute teacher in the Issaquah School District. I mainly sub at Issaquah Middle School. And this is my second year starting for subbing. And this year I was devastated to learn that Larry White was no longer at IMS when I was there, because last year I predominantly subbed at IMS, and Larry basically came to my rescue on a daily basis. In the classroom, I was definitely subjected to all the things that Larry was talking about. And he was always the one to come. Whenever I would call the office, he would come, and he would come into my classroom and just be a presence. And I knew I could get to the class because he was there. And never once did he raise his voice. And anytime that he helped kind of diffuse the situation, it was always done very calmly. And he would mostly talk to the students and bring them out into the hallway and just have a very constructive conversation with them. And on one particular day when I was really upset about what had happened, and mind you, there are many subs in the district who will not sub at Issaquah Middle School because of the environment there and how they are abused and treated. And I would keep coming back because of Larry. And on this one particular day when I was super frustrated just about, feeling beaten up, I was walking out with Larry, talking to him about it. And I was surprised because he actually told me that all of the compassion he felt for these kids, because he knew that their home lives were not ideal and that he wanted to give them the support that they were not necessarily getting at home, and to listen to them and to give them the opportunity to make the right choice or a different choice. And it really inspired me to take that approach as well, and just gave me a different way to look at it that I still bring into the classroom today. But I definitely wish that Larry was still on campus to support me and everyone else.
Thank you for your input. Stephen, do we have anyone on the phone? 0 on the phone. Were you coming up in the room?
Good evening, Robert Young. I live in the Issaquah High School service area. Just hearing some of the comments today about the impact that it's having, I came to speak on behalf of Larry White. I want to speak on behalf of the kids, actually the kids who are perpetrating these things, and not just the racial slurs, but also, the sexual problems. Those perpetrators are being taught something. They're being taught things that are not in alignment with our mission, not in alignment with life management and personal awareness. They're being taught that they can behave in ways and say things that in any other setting they will be ostracized, they'll be a pariah. They will not be successful in life if they learn these lessons that we are teaching them right now. We are disserving these kids and every kid who watches what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Hand waving, please.
Hi, my name is Suzanne White, Issaquah High School, Larry's wife, just to start us off. Our kids went to PCMS as 7th, and they started in 5th grade. My younger son, at one time, the principal called us and said, something happened in the PE bathrooms today. Some kids were singing songs that were kind of racially motivated. We don't think your son heard anything, but we want to tell you about it. We also want to tell you that we've talked to the kids that were doing it and their parents, because that's not acceptable. Immediately it was handled and it never happened again. Why is PCMS so different than IMS? My husband's parents were born in Montserrat. He was born in London. He grew up in the Bronx. He spent most of his life in the South. As you can tell, I'm from the South. When we decided to get married, part of my family disowned us. Not until we were here, was it January 3rd, 2022, and he came home from his first day of work and said, I was called the N-word all these times. He had never had that, even with my family disowning us. Why is that acceptable? Why is that okay? He even told me other words that I'd never heard of. Why do we accept that? Why is it okay for kids to do that? Is Issaquah so different than the Bronx? I mean, all these people want to say yes, that we're higher, whatever, but it's not. And to Rob's point, what are we teaching those kids? To the bullying, what are we teaching our girls? That this is okay? That they just stand back and don't do anything? I'm in corporate world. We don't do that. We ally for each other. We have to, because too much goes unspoken. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Okay.
So I am Joshua Navarro and I go to Issaquah Middle School. And I just want to say that Larry White, or Officer White, as we know him at school, he is one of the nicest persons in the building. He will say hi to you. He will greet you. He always has a smile on his face, no matter what time I see him in the day. And to hear that he has to deal with this every day, all this racism, is just heartbreaking, because I've known Larry for a couple years as he lives in my neighborhood. And he's just one of the nicest people I know. And I know it's very hard for him, but he keeps on pushing every day.
Thank you for your input. Good job, Joshua. Okay, thank you. And you said on Zoom, 0. Thank you very much. As I said, as we get to further agenda items, I will call for input at that time. So at this point, it is time for the approval of the consent agenda. Consent agenda is a meeting management tool that is used by the board to approve materials that have been reviewed in a single action. Do I have a motion?
I move the consent agenda be approved as presented.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any against? Thank you. Consent agenda passes. Move on to the establishment of the regular agenda. Are there any changes to the regular agenda?
There are no changes.
Thank you. So first agenda item to cover is the report out on the WASDA annual conference by the board. The board and the superintendent attended the WASDA, which is the Washington State School Directors Association annual conference that happened in Spokane, November 17th to the 20th. So this is our opportunity for the board to share any discussion, any takeaways or learnings. Would anyone like to get us started? Director Weaver.
It was a good conference. I don't have my notes from it, but one of the things that was really impressive was the lunchtime Q&A with the 4 student reps. I thought that was really fascinating, and they had some very good insights, I think, into the whole student rep program and things that we could do to make ours better. As far as classes went, I went to a couple of different ones on strategic planning that were quite interesting. I'm trying to find my notes here. Where'd they go? One was Everett talking about their strategic plan, and they're a somewhat similar size district to us. So that they had some interesting input with how they went through the whole process and what worked and what didn't work. And then I went to a second one that was specifically, and why can I never find things when I want them? Oh, it was Kelso, who also engaged in a strategic planning process. They're a much smaller district. They're around 4,700, but they were focused on how they incorporated student voice in their strategic planning and going around to every school and having lunchtime meetings with students. And they felt that that really gave their strategic plan a boost to have this amount of input from students. And they talked to students K-12, so it wasn't just the middle schoolers and the high schoolers. So that one was really interesting. And then Director Moore and I went to the law conference. I'll let you talk about that one. That one's always interesting.
Yes, the law conference was 2/3 of a day on the day before the conference. Well, on the day it was really getting started. It was very interesting. We always have Sonia Trainer from NSBA, which is the National School Board Association, come and share about cases that are going through the courts, the appeal courts up to the Supreme Court. There were several related to like First Amendment issues. And she would very clearly kind of go through some of the issues having to do with the free exercise or, having its establishment of religion. And so she's very interesting to hear talk through some of those types of cases. They also had somebody that came and talked about collective bargaining and rules and controls around, how we do open public meetings and public records and how all of that works. And then, it was a very interesting one. So I appreciate it. Unfortunately, I wasn't well for the other days of the conference and wasn't able to get to any of the other sessions.
Yeah, one of the things that was particularly interesting, I thought, in the law conference is she explicitly addressed how changes in the Supreme Court and their attitudes towards the exercise of, there was freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And sometimes the way those two play off each other, the court is making some interesting and different types of decisions. So it's sort of a stay tuned for more situation, but she does a good job of really kind of digging into that and what's happening and what's trending. So that was well worth our time.
And for me, the standout also was the law conference. And for me, it just reminded me of my frustration with the National School Board Association and not writing an amicus brief on the Bremerton Kennedy versus Bremerton bill. What is interesting is I did happen to see that apparently some elementary school in the Bay Area is looking to have a Satan club. And so, that's exactly what you would expect. So it was interesting that NSBA didn't want to seem anti-Christian. And so they didn't take a stand on that. And I'm like, it's not about being anti-Christian. It's about the division of when somebody is an agent of the state and what are they doing when it comes to a religious activity or religious practice. So it will be interesting to see what other things pop up based on that. And the expression of staff members and their religious beliefs in, when they're on school grounds. The other one I went to, I was really looking forward with our MTSS work and some of our inclusion work. I was excited to be able to go to a breakout session about special ed and inclusion, only to find out that they were probably right behind what we were doing. And so that we were actually further along. So that's always disappointing when you're like, I'm taking my time of not going to a strategic planning breakout session so I can learn something else, only to find out, well, I think we're actually doing the work. We're farther along in that work. So, and then I spent the second day in bed with a very high fever and didn't attend the rest of the class.
There was a bit of a bug. Superintendent, what about you?
I appreciated getting to be with the board, although it was a partial combination of the board throughout the days. But it's an opportunity for us to learn, right, and take that learning and share that with each other during the informal times throughout the conference. What stood out for me were, in addition to some of the strategic planning, although I'm familiar with the Everett work, was conversations with colleagues and from presenters around budgeting and how many districts are facing some significant challenges as they look across to the budget process and their need to right size and course correct on their budgets in the upcoming year and beyond. And I also appreciated hearing from students across many different sessions about their voice and their role in working along school boards and school districts, and influencing decision-making, having an input into decision-making and into governance processes. So that was a real highlight. I will certainly give a lot of kudos to one of the Mercer Island student representatives who was very active in the various different panels and was quite adept at explaining his role and his experience on Mercer Island.
It's awesome. So I managed to stay well through the whole thing. So I was very excited about that. It was a really good opportunity, I think, on student voice and to get to talk to student representatives and to hear about their advocacy, their want of more input into direct decision making, like a vote of the board, and different configurations. I know for me, it jump-started some things we'll do here to look at the student rep program that we just launched and see how we augment that even the second half of this school year. So I'm very excited about that. Right, wrote a lot of ideas on that topic. I think for me, it's just always fascinating the size and scale difference of the school districts across the state of Washington, to see that there's school districts, I'm going to say in double digits of students that they have in some of our school districts in Washington, up to, obviously Seattle. So the challenges, though, are the same. And I'm fascinated to hear how districts of all sizes and shapes and demographics end up solving those problems, because I think they do help us think about that here in Issaquah. So that was, I think, fantastic. Any additional items we want to add to this one before we move on? Awesome. Thank you for all your insights. And then our next, we do have NSBA. I think that comes up in, is that February?
No, NSBA is in April.
April.
We have the Ledge Conference.
Ledge Conference is February, and then a National School Board Association in April. So thank you. So we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is works in progress. So I'll turn it over to you, Superintendent.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to highlight several works in progress, but first I'm going to celebrate something that was on the news today. So Como featured this particular highlight from the school district, but our Liberty School teacher, Bree Macri, and her class supported the Salvation Army's toy drive and sorted toys to be delivered to local children. So the link is available, I'm sure, on the Como website. I can also pass it along to the board after this, and we hope you enjoy seeing our students serving the community. I'd love to share next about some feedback from some prior meetings and share with the community and the board some of the efforts that are in place related to social emotional learning at the high school level. This came up not only in prior meetings from our student directors, from community, from public input from the community forum as well, but also several meetings with the ASB at the various high schools that I've had the opportunity to join Andrea Zier at. And we've heard from, along the way that SEL and social emotional learning lessons are an important part of the journey at high school, but also that we can do better with our content and delivery and so forth. So based on all this feedback about high school social emotional learning, Andrea Zier is forming a committee of teachers, administrators, and students to plan for better content and delivery of social emotional learning lessons for the 23 to 24 school year. This week, Andrea also met with Committee for Children, who is the parent organization that has developed and produced this second step. She met with their product and innovation teams, and they're going to help partner on this work as they're keenly aware of the challenges that come with delivering social emotional learning lessons and learning experiences for the high school age group. So we are excited about that work, and we have enlisted outside partnership, and we're moving that forward. School improvement work is happening and underway. That's something that we'll be tackling together and later in the spring. But we are going deeper with school improvement planning by conducting root cause analysis. And next week, Executive Director Susan Mundell and Melinda Reinvan will lead the principals at the elementary level through a root cause analysis protocol to support action planning in the school improvement plans. So you can look for that analysis to come through as you review those in the spring. As it relates to community engagement, we released a 100-day reflections video at the end of last week. And really that's about setting the stage for, in addition to reflecting what I've learned and heard along the way, setting the stage for strategic planning and budget work. So that's been released and that's out in the community. I've also met with several different folks and stakeholder groups external to Issaquah School District, including Issaquah City Administrator Wally Bobkowitz, met with my Puget Sound ESD regional superintendents for a regular business meeting. And I joined Representative Steve Berquist for a visit hosted by Jane Harris at Apollo Elementary School. We visited some classrooms, had a chance to talk to each other about priorities, got to know each other, and Jane Harris and Steve Berquist found a specific overlap in interest area. So they bonded over some common hobbies and interests outside of work, which was really, really neat to see that overlap. An update on the strategic planning and budget process. We are in the pre-launch phase with Delivery Associates. Right now, we are undergoing what I would call a rapid review, which is working with the Delivery Associates team to immerse themselves in a lot of our data, our work, our executive limitations, our ends. They're starting by also interviewing each cabinet member, one, to establish a relationship and get to know them as we continue to create a foundation for this work into the new year, but also to hear from their perspective directly and to identify any additional data sets or information that would be helpful in the foundation of this work. And we'll likely expand that to a couple other administrators in the district as well as needed. In addition to that, Sherry Cox and Martin Turner are leading initiative and program mapping at a district level. So this is a way for us to take stock of what are all the different initiatives and programs in a deeper way and try to cost that out and see what those allocated costs and capacity looks like in current state. And that will be another input into the budget and strategic planning process. And finally, enrollment's a topic that comes up quite a bit. So we just had the sort of updated enrollment numbers, and we're up another 40 students from the past month. And about 75% of that group, so about 30, are in the K-5 grade levels, with the rest evenly distributed at the high school and middle school level. So we're still down from our overall high water mark in recent years, but a little bit up from our projections for this year specifically. Couple final items here, but our cabinet continues to visit schools on a regular basis as part of our cabinet meetings. And this past week, we visited the Briarwood Elementary School. We saw a great amount of evidence of just phenomenal UDL work and MTSS work across Briarwood, and very strong positive culture, very intentional alignment between both behavioral and academic tier supports, and a process that's clear to identify when students need additional supports in tier 2 and also tier 3. So that was very powerful to do together. And just want to highlight a lot of the work that we're doing to bring our social emotional learning, behavioral supports, and academic supports into one sort of holistic view of how a student might be doing and what we can do to further accelerate their learning and growth and development. Also, next week, we have an equity advisory committee, which is in partnership between the district and the IEA, kicking off next week. And that will be co-led by Sharon Roy and Elena Sividawson. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about snow and inclement weather. That was basically the news of last week. And so we had to continue to take new information. Our district, as we all know, has different terrain. There are very different distinct weather patterns that impact different parts of the district. For example, Preston had a lot of snow and downtown Issaquah had no snow. So that's just one example of that. And we did, earlier this week, specifically modify some of our routes specifically for transportation for Preston as well. So we're looking at how we can contextualize some of our transportation. Also, as a side effect or ripple effect of the snow, inclement weather changes to our school days last week, we are actually now hosting the elementary conference day, which was canceled last Thursday. That has been rescheduled to Monday, December 12th. So there will be no school for elementary students on that day to honor the time needed for parents to meet with teachers to learn about their students' learning growth. So that's just a snapshot of what's happening in the district. And that's it for me, unless there are other questions from the board.
Any questions or comments on works in progress? Thank you for that. Okay, we'll move into our next agenda item, which is the discussion of the interpretation or your revised interpretation for ends 2, academics parts 1 and 2. I will call for public comment on this. I will do that after the superintendent and team have an opportunity to present their part.
Great, thank you. I'd like to invite Rich Mellish and Dr. Dana Bailey up here while I frame this up, and then we'll turn it over to Rich and Dana to speak more in depth about proposed changes to the interpretation and proposed evidence that will go along with that as we prepare for those formal approvals and consideration by the board in January. So the first comment I'll make to frame this up is that we went through the prior interpretation and evidence and wanted to ensure that equity as a theme was woven more prominently throughout. In addition, as an expression of that, so we maintain a very big focus on very high expectations. So we have consistently asked that of ourselves to be looking at how we ensure that our students both meet and exceed expectations for academic performance. But we also intentionally called out closing gaps and having accelerated growth where there might be evidence where there are students or groups of students who are behind their peers. And so that's an important expression of our focus on equity woven throughout. We also aspired to shorten the list of evidence as we believe that a more narrow focused set of data will help the board and district consider progress through our system and make connections and dots and connect the dots between different data sets that allow us to really look at how our students move through their learning experiences through transitions from grade levels, and that these different data sets brought together, more narrow and different data sets brought together will help us go deeper in a few areas that drive our work in very intentional and prioritized ways. So we're specifically looking for the board's feedback and direction on input, right, to what kind of data would be most helpful to drive at the most important aspects of both high academic achievement, so well-being for students, as well as making sure every kid is on an accelerated pathway to both meet and exceed expectations. And then finally, we updated the interpretation to reflect the discussion that we had on evidence. So sometimes we have new evidence that's come to light that we want to use, and that might actually inform a tweak or a change into how we are interpreting the ends, and reciprocally, ensuring that we are looking at the different changes to even what is in our data set and collection that can be most helpful for discussing whether or not we are meeting our ends for academics and foundations. So those are my high level points. And I'll turn it over to Rich to just pull out a few highlights along the way in ends 2.
Right. All right. Thank you for seeing that. So Rich Mellish, Executive Director of Teaching and Learning Services. And just wanted to give a little bit of the thinking behind the structure of this and how we are proposing to structure the evidence. So as just some screenshots of the ends document that you received earlier, hoping that some of the language is a little bit more accessible language and a little bit more meaningful, much as Superintendent Tauyik just shared. And we also wanted the progress and the indicators. The previous work on ends 2 focused a lot on high school and post-high school. And we felt like E2 should recognize the whole journey of the student from preschool through graduation, and acknowledge those milestones along the way that lead up to that readiness for college career and beyond. Move my screen stuff. We also wanted to front load and kind of reorganize some of the data that's relevant throughout. So in the past, we've had a whole bunch of Word documents linked into this. And so we're trying to figure out how to make the data more accessible, more focused, and especially as we go into that, making sure that we're getting that longitudinal data, seeing what's happening over time and disaggregating it by race, program, and in other cases by different demographic groups. So as we look at the statements after the general statement, statements 2.1, 2.9, and 2.10 highlight some of the knowledge and skills that have broad applications across disciplines. With those, we really wanted to anchor the interpretations and our evidence to the state standards and the educational research. The state has done a really nice job of anchoring their standards and building their standards around some of the educational research that really gets us to things like depth of knowledge and integration of technology. So I think they align very nicely with the statements in E2. And for evidence on these, we really wanted to make sure that we described our approach or strategy with a focus on integration of core universal instruction. In other words, a more of a focus on how all students get this benefit through their journey through Issaquah School District. And then be sure to find those evidence of learning outcomes and the application beyond school. So some of that's going to be continued evidence, as you saw, and some of it would be evidence that we tried to deepen and rework to these interpretations. Then the other large part of E2 are the statements that are really closely associated with one or more academic area. So like the ELA one example there. For these, we wanted to make sure you'll see the pattern in the interpretation that we build around the associated state standards. We build around statements around disproportionality and then the application beyond school. And so the evidence that we're recommending are structured around the program design and works in progress. So what are we doing in that curricular area for improvements, and what is our overall design? Making sure that we're giving you a robust look at the achievement data, especially in the areas of ELA, math, and science, where we have multiple measures and some standardized measures of progress. We also want to make sure that we have deepen our focus on monitoring accelerated growth for those students who have started their journey here below benchmark. And then finally, we want to look for the evidence of academic success. That could be course selection, that could be grades, that could be post-high school opportunities and success in their post-high school opportunities. So we follow this pattern for each of those statements as those statements center around the different disciplines that we teach throughout the years. So rather than go through each one further, I thought I would leave it there and see if there's questions that we can respond to.
I'd actually prefer to do public input at this point before we get into discussion, if there's any. So if there's any public input on this topic, if someone could raise their hand in the room or on Zoom, then I think we can get to board questions and discussion. Who wants to start? Director Weaver.
So I had a question. I think when I read this the first time, I interpreted it one way, and now that I'm listening to you, I'm hearing it a different way. So for example, in 2.2, we've got A, each student will meet or exceed standards for literacy. That's good. That's what we meant. B, if students are below standard in literacy, they will experience accelerated growth. Now, is that an either or is that they're going to experience accelerated growth so that they ultimately hit the standard?
Yeah, I do think that we are hoping that all of our students eventually hit that standard. That is always going to be our aspiration in any given year. So we have some students who start below standard, and what we're hoping is if they do and they don't reach standard, that we have evidence of accelerated growth, that what we've done is help them close that gap between where they started and the standard.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm getting at, and this is what I was struggling with when I read this, is the end is the goal. And so the goal for the board is that every student hits or exceeds that benchmark. Now, to me, if we have students who are below the benchmark and we're trying to accelerate their growth, that's more of an evidence thing. That's how we're showing reasonable progress towards the end. But the end is everybody hit the target. So if accelerated growth is accelerated growth so that they hit the target, that's one thing. If we're saying, well, they're really behind, but if we can get them 2 years growth in 1 year, they may not hit the standard, but they're still better off than they were. That's more evidence towards reasonable progress. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I struggle a little bit with whether that should be in the interpretation or not. But I want you to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just to be really clear.
That is also understood.
Next comment. I guess one of my comments was about the accelerated growth piece as well. Although I like what Suzanne just said a whole lot better. So for me, what I liked about having it here is the clarity that we can do both things at the same time. I agree with you that it probably is an evidence thing. I don't think we've been clear about that in the past. I think we sort of looked at people achieving standard and then sort of growth in separate conversations. And so I like the idea of bringing it into one, but she is correct that it probably is more of an evidence piece though. But I also want both.
I mean, if it's A and B and C, then I guess I would be okay leaving it there. I just don't want to get into the thing of, well, not everybody can be at 100%, but if we get somebody from 60 to 80, that's really good. And that is really good, but more in the context of reasonable progress towards getting everybody to 100.
And that was going to say, that's the thing, because that is the reasonable progress of moving the students that don't currently meet the standard to meeting the standard, right? Because that's where we're trying to get to, but it also matters for every kid that they're making that progress. And I think for some of this, well, and I'm not sure, because we've had so many different kinds of data and evidence and student growth, you know, if then, because you have this use of mean 20th percentile, 10th percentile detailed performance level to monitor accelerated growth. So that's the method to monitor the progress, to see students are accelerating their growth.
Yes, so that is a method that would be evidence to show for accelerated growth. One method would be to say, if we set a benchmark that by a certain time we wanted a certain percentage of students to have met standard, then monitoring the 20th percentile would, for example, help us know when we hit 80% of students meeting standard and whether that group that's lagging are getting closer and closer to standard.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the idea of we've tended to look at just percent meeting standard, and that doesn't tell us whether the people not meeting standard are getting closer. So by using a 10th percentile and a 20th percentile, we begin to see students who are below standard getting closer to standard. And so it just gives us a more robust measure of gap closure.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was going to say, I also notice in the discontinue, talking about using less of the year-to-year measurements in favor of cohort progress monitoring, which is what we keep, at times have been asking for, and we get in some of the SIPs, right? Because it's not just about how many kids are passing this year, because they are different kids than the kids before, but for the kids that were here, how are they progressing? And are they more and more of the students, meeting the state standards?
Probably one of the things that we did not highlight in here enough is, because you've seen it begin to show up in the school improvement plans, is that iReady gives us what they call stretch growth goals and allows us to monitor kind of percent of students, and in various demographic and program groups, percent of students who are experiencing accelerated growth. So it's giving us that measure as well that you've begun to see in school improvement plans. That is a simplified cohort measure as well.
I'm noodling on what Suzanne said about the one, because it's in most of them, like students who score below.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think if you don't state it, you don't measure it. And so if it's not part of the goal, if it's not part of the interpretation, then there wouldn't really be reason for you to bring evidence that you're doing that thing. So if you don't state that, by the way, under the social study, students who score below standard in core academic skills impacting their performance in social studies will be provided equitable opportunity to attain and demonstrate proficiency. So if you don't state that you're looking at and have programmatic means of doing something additional for those students, if it's not stated as part of the interpretation, then there would be no reason for it to be a part of the evidence provided in a way. So I'm still kind of, I'm sitting through going, I don't think I mind having it in the interpretation to ensure that when we receive the documentation, you've told us, how are you addressing students that aren't proficient?
And as long as it's an and, which I think as I look at it, it is and A and B and C, then I think I'm okay with it. I just kind of wanted to bring it up because it kind of wobbled back and forth between where it belonged. But I take your point.
And some of it is, it's because we don't state it in our statement, but can you state it in the interpretation that it's an expectation? So we don't use the word expectation in our language, but in your interpretation, being able to say, we expect each student will demonstrate knowledge and inquiry, so that it's setting that we have that expectation as a part of the interpretation. And I don't know if that makes a difference. So if you say we expect every student to be proficient, then the second statement is okay because you're talking about there may be times where students aren't, and here's how we are addressed.
I also wondered if what I understood just was that if you were to imply, if it's implied and we made it less implied and more explicit, that the original statement talks about upon graduation. So if we're to say there's an implicit upon graduation, each student will meet or exceed English language arts standards for literacy. Along the way, the ones that aren't there yet will experience accelerated growth. And so I think trying to make that more explicit, is that what I'm hearing from Director Reaver?
I think so, yes. Because I take Director Maraldo's point that if it isn't there, we won't necessarily be looking to measure it. And I do think it's important.
Right, because it's the only way we're going to get.
It's the only way we're going to get there.
Get kids caught up or meeting standards if they're below, is to pretty much accelerate their growth.
I don't know why that set less well with me. Sorry to belabor it. It's like saying we expect that at the end they'll meet standard. But I think our expectation is that they will be able to reach standard along the way. So I guess that we expect that at graduation felt less like a lower expectation for me, said that way. Maybe not by others.
Yes, but I mean, yeah, it's hard because we don't want any students not meeting expectations, but we will have students not meeting expectations. And it's what we do with them to help them get to the expectations. And it could be that they don't meet expectations in third and fourth, and by fifth, they're there and they stay on that track.
And I agree with everything you just said, but in that statement of by the time of graduation is what I'm referring to.
Not like waiting until right before they graduate. Yes, doing it immediately.
Correct.
Or as soon as we're seeing they're not at standard.
Yes.
So yes, okay.
So our intent was to be and, because in order to ensure that every student is meeting or exceeding standards, you have to look at where kids are when they enter, and if they are below, they do have further to go, as was stated. So our goal was not to say either or, it was to say both and, so that it would lead us to be intentional. This is also supposed to drive our work, right? And help us make choices, and where we focus our time and energy is to ensure that we also have the right kinds of systems, structures, training, and supports to help those who might be further behind to be on an accelerated pathway.
Yeah, and what I didn't say, and probably should have led with this, is that I really liked the overall interpretation, and I like the fact that we're going back to looking at K-12 or P-12 data, as opposed to in the old version, we did a lot of upon graduation students will. And it's important that we be looking at, I mean, yes, the ultimate goal is that when they leave, they should be able to do all these things. But the only way to get them there is to be measuring them along the way. So I did like that we were moving in that direction.
And it shares the responsibility across the system for the success of students, and that we are monitoring along the way throughout the system on how students are doing. And I think that level of interpretation is really important.
And I was just going to say, I know we have some of that data, and you stress it in here that we have as much disaggregated data as possible, right, for the different demographic and program subgroups, so that we can especially see when there are specific groups that have lower rates at meeting state standards, because we have those issues to address.
Yes, and most of our assessment data is pretty easily disaggregated. It's the multi-year that's not as easy all the time at this moment in time because of the disruption of data streams and the kind of reset of a baseline last year. So some of it we're saying, and we created some new progress monitoring data, so we're still developing the historical record of those. So that the when possible was probably more about the historical 3-year trends. That is a little bit harder to come by in some of our data sets right now, but most of our data sets with our systems are pretty easily disaggregated. As you know, our low income is the one that's the hardest to keep regular data disaggregation on because of the laws that limit our ability to look at that data.
I'd say I have a couple more I was curious about, if it's okay. I guess I've got the mic. So the one I thought was interesting, so I really appreciate the format. I appreciate it's much easier to read. I think being much more clear about the data. So I'm all on board with those pieces of it. After the accelerated growth for me, the thing that was interesting is that it was clear we were trying to get more touch points along the student life cycle, I guess pre-K to graduation. But early high school, I guess the one I look at the most and I don't see here is the 9th grade F rate. And so that was the one that for me, I was hoping, and now you may say that's in the like graduation pathway data, like in whatever that bundle is, but that one wasn't clear to me, but that's a pretty clear indication that 9th grade F rate that we are having some lagging success in getting to graduation.
So you're talking about evidence?
I'm absolutely talking about evidence. I was good with the interpretation. And so I guess I'm talking, so your interpretation, it's clear you're trying to expand to a wider set of the growth, but it felt like we went from earlier ed and then jumped to graduation. And so I'm trying to figure out are we getting some clear measures in that early high school that we don't miss that?
Yeah, the part that says benchmark data, key achievement points by cohort, I think that's where we can use multiple data sources to say what are those key data points that help us know whether or not cohorts are on track. And in my mind, the 9th grade on track to graduate, which is that very related to that F rate, or we could look at F rate, the pass rate, we've talked about that in the past being a key benchmark. And so that easily could fit within that data.
Perfect.
In my mind, it does, but we're still building the data sets for this. So we're really
I didn't want to miss the opportunity to bring that one up because that's the one I'm going to ask about. So I should tell you, you now.
That's exactly what we want to know right now. What you're going to ask about.
That's the one I'm going to ask about.
If we're going to talk about evidence, I really appreciate, and I think when I see enrollments and grades in 2.7 where it talks about math, that's the math pathways and who's enrolled, especially in that middle school acceleration, all the way through high school, because I think one of the things that I still don't know is how our change to our Common Core math pathways have impacted how many students are able to get all the way to Calc BC compared to what it was maybe, now I have to think probably 10 years ago when we've made that drastic change, just how many people how many students are being limited because we don't offer the same math paths, or it seems like we've eased off of those more accelerated math paths. So I'm excited about having that information probably spelled out in a better way here.
And if we're on that one, I like how you're adding this grad pathways and how students meet their math graduation requirements, because there really are a number of ways of which students can meet those. And I have no idea exactly how this will turn out, right? What that will look like in the different ways, because we want to make sure students know that there are multiple ways and there are multiple courses that will allow them to meet that graduation requirement.
I have one more. I'm probably going to bounce back to interpretation now. I actually don't remember where I copied it from. I'll just say what it is. So the example I copied was in 2.3, students who score below standard in a core academic skill impacting performance in social studies. So it was just an example. In this case, will be provided an equitable opportunity to obtain and demonstrate proficiency. And so conceptually, I love that statement. I am just not sure I understand how we would either demonstrate it or see evidence that there's an equitable opportunity, that they've had the opportunity to close some of those gaps.
Yes, I think that is making a commitment to create some new evidence. So that is one that we're still unpacking. How do we collect robust evidence on that? It's very fitting with our focus on universal design for learning, which is part of that is multiple means of representation, multiple means of expression of learning. So how do you make sure that if a student comes in with literacy difficulties, that they have access to social studies curriculum, social studies ideas? If they have challenges in writing, do they have an opportunity to express their learning in social studies or in science in ways that they're not being penalized for having some weaknesses in writing? That's the intent behind that statement. How to collect systematic evidence on that is something that we're gonna have to work with. I do think that some of our grading practices will also fold into that.
Oh, that's so interesting, because my brain went a totally different direction. What you just said totally makes sense, right? If students have that there's not a barrier based on an existing skill in order to participate in the learning. So this is probably why I was drawn to it, because I think I guess one of the things I'm curious about is student and family awareness of either various pathways to get to a certain level of proficiency, or if a student has not demonstrated proficiency their first go round, do they understand the additional opportunities, the additional delivery methods available to them in order to demonstrate that on a second pass? So is that, what menu is available, or how can families understand that it's not, I guess I'm obsessed with the F rate, but how can families understand that one bad grade is not the end goal for them? So they have additional opportunities to come back and retake coursework. They have different formats and settings they can take it in, summer school, online, et cetera. And so that's one of the things I feel is opaque in the system today, and part of the stressors that keeps kids from continuing to engage, because it feels like I've failed versus there's multiple ways to come back. But your explanation totally makes sense, and I love that as well. But I think it's access to the way to come back is what I was hoping for in that statement of equitable opportunity to attain and demonstrate proficiency.
I really appreciate the thought. We hadn't gone there yet in our list that you see here, but describing our recovery opportunities is something that we can absolutely add to that.
I actually thought when I first read that you were kind of dancing with EL12, but then I realized you weren't.
What?
Well, like when we say, well, if a kid fails a test, we give them another opportunity, that kind of thing. But I realized they were going in a different direction.
I think they're related. I absolutely believe they are related and connected. Yes.
I think that actually the excuse me, that whole concept kind of makes me wonder where we have and where we fit into things. So this is our expectation, is that students will meet this level. But we also talk about wanting, and at least in the past, we've wanted them to be able to meet their full potential. So where does that kind of come into play in the interpretation that, yes, I want them to meet these standards, but I also want them to excel if they're capable of excelling. I want them to reach their full potential, which may be farther. And we talk about our high school courses, or the schedule is so that there's room for, acceleration, exploration, and remediation. And where do we as a board, and then subsequently staff and interpretation and monitoring, report back to us that there are opportunities for acceleration, exploration, and remediation?
That has certainly been a discussion on our end of, because a lot of the evidence we had in previous monitorings included the list of the AP classes and the many CTE options that we have, and the college and the high school. So we that has been in there, and we've also put clubs and other enrichment opportunities in past E2 monitorings. And if comments on whether that is something you want to see continuing to be in there or not is important for us to know, I suppose.
Well, or is that future board work to really determine when and how we want to set that as an end? Set that as part of our either existing, because we kind of did that was the one thing that kind of got taken away. I think it was the life management and personal awareness somewhere in there was about reaching personal goals and personal desires, of what they wanted to do. And did that really get embedded back? And then how do we speak to that ability to have the opportunity to explore and excel?
The question of activities that are maybe more directly aligned to academics, so robotics or computer science. So there is overlap still. I don't think we'll ever be completely, disparate in how we bucket our various data points. But the question there is it about all activities that would be listed here and or opportunities for students to explore? And the answer is, I believe, possibly no. It's more about what are the focus areas that might complement and augment the academic and foundation efforts. But that's a question that we were hoping to tease out of this, as Rich was saying. We're hoping for some feedback on that. I'll also share one comment that I think is helpful, which is, actually, no, I'll hold it for right now. I'm good. Thanks.
Any other comments, questions? Any more from you? Did that give you enough on the first pass of the interpretation and what will be the evidence?
Yes, we will do our absolute best to bring you what we believe will be meaningful.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Good timing, guys. Okay, so our next topic is similar type of discussion, looking at the updated interpretation for EL 16, our equity EL. I will again call for public comment after we've had an opportunity for superintendent and staff to make any presentation. Over to you.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to share a couple of framing points. Elena Sivadosan is not with us tonight due to also feeling unwell. There's just a lot of unwellness going on right now. So I have had lots of opportunity to work directly with Elena, as well as to consider our interpretation. And we're focusing on the interpretation so we can kind of really, there's a lot of changes to it. And we want to make sure that we are getting your input on that one, because it's fairly substantive in my mind. But we've had also a full cabinet review, and we had a lot of input from students as well. So a couple of just high level points, as everyone can read the track changes, and that's available to you all. But we wanted to focus on learning and training for all people in our system, and that includes students, staff, and administrators. And that starts with me, and then that's part of the opening, which is I view myself, and this actually did come up during my superintendent interview day, which is the expectation that the CEO is not only the chief executive officer, but also the chief equity officer of the organization. So I do need to model my own learning journey and my own inquiry as it relates to ensuring that diversity, equity, inclusion is at the forefront of everything that we do. And they need to support and promote that work, foster it, facilitate it, lead, and also follow. So all of that to me is wrapped into the learning process. And that was a very clear theme, just to link to the student input. They were intrigued and wanting to say, this is something that we all need to learn more about. It's not as easy to say, this is what the definition of a term is, and so learn it. It's actually through experiences, through discourse, through self-reflection, through conversation with others, and then ongoing moments to say, this is where this is in action. And this is equity in our classroom. This is equity in our processes and so forth. So I did hear that from our students directly. There's a focus in the interpretation changes overall about making sure that it's represented, as I said, in all levels of our organization. And specifically in classrooms, our students need to feel like they belong. And on teams, our staff need to feel like they belong. We also were very clear in the interpretation. And one thing that I was very focused on was doing more with family partnership. And I did share some of this in my reflection from what I heard from the first 100 days around ensuring that we have representative voices at the table along the way. And that means doing different things and asking yourselves first and foremost, is the feedback we're getting through this particular mechanism, whether it's a survey or a community forum, that the attendees and individuals who are participating are representative of the full, diversity of our district? And if that's not the case, and what are we doing to ensure that we are intentionally making space, reaching out to different voices to ensure that we're getting those perspectives? And then finally, we wanted to highlight the attract and retain diverse and representative staff as well. And as a minor note, and this will go away in the subsequent years' interpretations, there were some activities that fell sort of into the equity team's department overview, or sort of purview rather, that were really about COVID. So it's like an all hands on deck. So I did want to note that our equity team in particular did step up and ensure that people were vaccinated, right, by helping to run clinics in partnership with our operations team. Obviously, I don't expect to have that be a part of the interpretation or evidence, in future years beyond this year. I apologize, but there was one track change that didn't totally flow all the way through, which was in the second part of the EL. So that will be made more clear in the future. So those are just some of my thoughts along the way, and would invite reactions to the specific track changes in the interpretation and anything I said, and wonderings, questions, feedback.
Perfect. Thank you. At this time, I will look for any public input in the room. Any on the Zoom? Thank you, sir. Okay, we can go to board discussion. What did you say? Wonderings?
Wonderings, comments, feedback.
Wonderings, comments, or feedback? Who wants to start?
I don't have anything specific, but I like this so much better.
Anything in particular that jumps out for you, Director Weaver, in that vein? I should state at the beginning of my term that I am an introvert and I'm very comfortable with silence, so I can wait for people to have thoughts. I'm happy to give the couple things I wrote down. I think you're consistently demonstrating a sort of simplification of language, a clarification of intent that I deeply appreciate. I think plain language is important. I think that your opening statement was the one I was really going to talk about, which is your statement as the Chief Equity Officer of the district. I think In the past, a lot of that onus has fallen solely to the equity department and forced them to sort of navigate and operate. And so I think it is an important, it's an important change in tone, as well as I think what you just stated there in the opening about the importance of us helping all of the humans in the system, from our students to staff and administration. For me, that's a strong update.
I would say overall, I just feel like there's more meat behind the interpretation. And so I look forward to seeing what evidence will come with that. But, and I too, I noticed that Chief Equity Officer, and I appreciated the mention of that responsibility, and that the onus is on the superintendent to be the sole, the ultimate owner of this work, even though it's delegated to staff. So I appreciate that, but I just feel like I'm excited to see what evidence will come, because it's much more robust. I think it's really helping us. I would say we had a challenging time to make sure that whatever language we used was something that you were able to be in compliance of. So it was a compliance-based language, rather than our ends are done with reasonable progress, meaning progressional data. But when you have to write something when you write it, you have to write it in a way that a superintendent can actually comply and will actually, even from the initiation, do that. So a lot of it was, promoting or planning, but to actually see that there's going to be future evidence of that being done, I think I'm really excited about seeing what that's going to look like. And I also, to this item and the other, I think going through and just the deep reflection in these interpretations, I think inspires staff to take a second look at what is it we're doing and how are we going to get there. And so I just felt like there was more engagement just from staff, that the cabinet is really working on digging into what really shows that we're doing what we need to do. And then how does that inspire our work in other areas?
Along with that, I mean, it is true that when we set this up, because it is something that you state is in compliance without exceptions. And there's a lot of very meaty work in here to ensure across an entire system. But it is what we ultimately want, right? But it can be hard to achieve.
Any additional discussion or commentary? Any additional information you need from the board to move forward with the next version?
This was very encouraging. Thank you. I will share back with and debrief with the team around what we've heard and make sure that we also bring in Elena to this conversation. She's not here to hear it directly tonight. And other staff who are not here as well. So thank you. And I do think that, while your comment around compliance is there, I think there's nothing more important than ensuring that we have equity at the forefront of all of our work. And so this EL, which I had shared also during my time being interviewed by everyone in the community and the board for the superintendent's search day, that this was one of the most compelling. I mean, this one really spoke to me. There are lots of compelling aspects of all of our executive limitations, but this one is very core to my own values and personal and professional goals as it relates to my position here. So it is a worthy, meaty challenge, which I would expect to hold a very high bar for myself and for others on.
Yeah, go ahead.
One more statement is that, I want to make sure that I feel like we've heard so many things throughout our times on the board, hearing from students, hearing from staff members. We've even heard from the public tonight about things that we know we're not perfect. So a part of this is, what is the plan to get us? And so I think that students being away from school for a year had an impact. And we felt that last year, but it continues on. So how do we relearn the social structures of being together? And so I think that that still is a place where, last year I would say students, especially middle schoolers, went feral. Well, for 1 year I was sympathetic, but we do need to redirect what is the behavior we expect from our students, very much to what the public said, because it is expected beyond their time with us. And so if we want to set them up for being prepared and eager for accepting academic, occupational, and personal and practical challenges of life, we need to make sure that that includes how they behave and how they treat one another. And so I think it really is around that discussion. And so I'm looking forward to that piece of the plan of how are we planning to address this.
Yeah, and to your point on compliance, this is the type of EL that could very well come to the board with an exception or two. And it doesn't mean we're doing a bad job, and it doesn't mean our focus isn't on equity, but it is the type of thing that, we may not always be perfect. I just wanted to really acknowledge that, again, I think these interpretations are incredibly thoughtful, and somebody else said this before, really give people a better idea of what we are looking for. When you say the school district will, there's a word missing, will be able to acknowledge and identify the history, context, and current state of institutional barriers and inequity that students face based on their racial and ethnic backgrounds. I mean, that's a thoughtful, deep statement. And I think it makes it a lot clearer to people looking at the district, what it is we're talking about in this EL. So I really like this.
All right, thank you for that discussion. Was that all final comments? Anything else on that one? Wonderful. Okay, so let's move on to item number 5, which is resolution 1200, citizen request to change boundary from RSD to ISD. We do have action on this one. So is there a motion?
Chris, I move that the board adopt resolution 1200 as presented, denying the proposed citizen request to transfer territory from the Renton School District number 403 to the Issaquah School District number 411.
Second.
Do you want to do any sort of historical context or ground setting on this one? And then we can allow for public comment.
Yes, I can. And also Martin Turney will be up at the podium to also share any additional comments and answer any specific questions that might come up. This is a similar request that came before the board on June 23rd, 2022. And per the legal process that was followed in the spring, to respond to this type of petition or resolution is brought forward for you tonight. Directors Ann Moore and Suzanne Weaver and Martin Turney and myself met with the Renton School Superintendent, Dr. Damian Patinaud, and Director Shelby Scoville from Renton School District in mid-November. And there was a mutual agreement to put forward a resolution to deny the request. And I understand that Renton plans to move forward with a similar resolution at an upcoming board meeting. That's the context for this. And Martin, if you'd like to add anything, you can feel free. And otherwise, then we can open up to the next steps for the board president.
I think that covered most of it. Here for any questions that I can assist with.
Great, thanks. Thank you. How about we go with public input? If there's public input in the room on this item, take your hands. You can approach the dais. As I said earlier, it's an opportunity to give your input to the board. Please state your name and your area of the district. And you'll have 2 minutes as a general rule. The board will not respond to public input. Ask that you state your name, attendance area, and limit your comments to 2 minutes. We will time. And again, the board neither endorses or censors. Just thought I would do a little refresher on public input.
Good evening. My name is Brian Taylor. I am actually a resident of the petitioning area. Myself and my wife, who's actually present on Zoom because we have young kids, were the ones who fronted this petition, put it together, and did all the groundwork. It was met with overwhelming support, and we were not surprisingly disappointed by the publication that was added to the website on Tuesday, because we're at a loss as to the basis for rejecting this petition for the reasons that it appears that you're not mitigating the community interests. You're preventing precedents for the sake of presenting precedents, which is a violation of not only our due process as petitioners, but those of the future petitioners as well. Because if there's no precedents for the sake of preventing precedents, this whole thing is a legal fiction and can never happen. Of all the reasons that were presented of why this should be denied, that is a glaring issue, along with the fact that money's involved. It's impossible for a petition like this to not involve money, because every single petition has homes with property taxes that's either going to increase or decrease a certain district's income, and the opposite, or debt. So by already having these bases for a reason to deny a petition, you're in essence making it impossible for anyone to ever succeed on this type of petition, which makes me question why this petition process even exists if it's impossible. There are other facts that are presented as well, if I still have a little bit of time. The distance of the schools. Apollo is a stone's throw away from most of the schools there, while Sierra is on the border of Newcastle, which goes through several major traffic lights and traffic itself, which is only going to get worse as population increases. And the middle schools require freeway travel for many people to even get to. It's no contest as to which one's closer. Then there's the issue of school buses that I saw mentioned that also would have to be retained as well for additional hiring, but that's what the property taxes are for. I guess I'm out of time.
Thank you for your input. Additional comment? Yep, please come forward.
Hi, my name is Catherine Ham. I'm a recently new resident of the Vercello community. And while we just moved here and we don't have any kids yet, we kind of second this, and this is more just anecdotal. But when we moved to the neighborhood, I mean, part of it was on us, but we were looking at, the next street over, and we noticed all of those homes were part of the Issaquah School District. And we're like, oh, okay, cool. That's great. And the Apollo School, as Brian already mentioned, is so close to us. And I know that I don't know all of the information, that he has brought to the board, but just from a personal standpoint, that school is so close to us and so many of the homes in our neighborhood. And not only that, I have ties to the school district. My husband and I both grew up going through the school district. My mom works in this building, and we love these schools. So if we have the opportunity for our kids to be able to go there in the future, we would really love that. And since part of our neighborhood is already part of the school district, it is our hope that we can make our whole neighborhood part of the same school district. So anyways, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Sir?
Hello, my name is Charlie Shi, and I live in WasdA neighborhood. And I actually started living there when the house was built. So for quite a while, that's where I actually had one of my daughter born and goes to school. Right now, she's 12 years old. And first of all, I'm just going to add that some of the items listed as the rationale that first of all, certainly the distance is really inaccurate. Apollo, actually, I can take my daughter and take a walk a couple of minutes and just for the elementary. But my daughter went to elementaries in Kennedale, which is actually 6 of 4 or 5 is 5 miles or even more. And so that's the first, and also portable. Renton School District also over capacity. My daughter spent a whole year in portable in elementary, and now she spent a year in middle school as well. So it seems like ISD is concerned well, then last item that ISD is concerned, this is going to be detrimental financially to Renton School District. Well, if that's the case, then moving 116 students out of Renton School District would be probably the other way around, right? So that is what I'm thinking. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Is there anyone else in the room? Anyone on Zoom? There is one hand on Zoom. I am never going to be able to read that far. I think,
Hello?
oh, hi, are you able to turn on your video?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Can hear you, yes. Can't see yet.
Oh,
Okay. Oh, now it's-
hear me now?
looks like it's starting up now. Thank you, Stephen. No,
You guys cannot see me at all?
we cannot.
Uh,
Why don't we take a second or two? If you can't resolve it, why don't you go ahead and we'll just go ahead and start the timer for your comment.
all right. Hello, everyone. My name is Bing Wang. I'm a part of Chalo community. I actually started this petition with my husband, Brian Taylor. We have two lovely daughters. We start join this neighborhood and find out that the whole entire neighborhood was divided into two. Half of them go to Issaquah, half of them go to Renton. But the whole HOA hosts all the parties for all the holidays and events together, which has caused a lot of confusion. And I don't think it's a very good environment for kids to grow up together from the same neighborhood. Actually, I found several studies showing that if the kids come from the same neighborhood, going to different school, that will actually impact their mental health and a lot of other issues on the path of their growth. Another thing I want to mention is that on one of the reasons of denial that you guys mentioned about the school students got increased by 3%, which is nothing because based on the data from US News, here shows that on Apollo itself, the third grade students has 109. This is 2021 data. And then on the kindergarten, they have 66 students, which means that the past 4 years, they've been decreasing students enrollment. They only got only half of the students got enrolled last year. By increasing 3% in this year won't have the impact on anything. Overall, I think this petition is only 137 homes, 116 kids, which distribute among three schools, and each grade only gonna have only 8 students. It won't impact anything, and only gonna bring the harmonious and a good children growth environment for this neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your input. Anyone else, Stephen? No? Okay, thank you for that. We can go to board discussion.
So Director Weaver and I did sit in on the meeting with our superintendent and the superintendent from Renton, as well as their school director, as we discussed this. One of the important things that they mentioned is that the Renton School District is building a new elementary school that it's most likely these folks would feed into, which is very close, as well as both the middle schools are probably equal distance away, but this neighborhood literally sits next door to Hazen High School. And so Liberty High School would be significantly further away than the existing high school. So where one school may be closer, the other's further away, there, overall, there really isn't that much of an impact. In addition, when we looked at it, this neighborhood as an HOA is split, but more likely 2/3 of the homes are in the Renton School District and 1/3 in Issaquah. So in reality, it also seems more likely that if the 1/3, if they all really wanted to be together, the 1/3 could request to move over to join the other 2/3 that are sitting in the Renton School District. And I recognize that some may not think it's impactful, and it seems like a very small area, but it is certainly, both an increase in the number of students, and to the point, just about all of our schools have portables and students in portables, and we use portables to manage student growth or population growth. And then the last point is that this would be a neighborhood that is surrounded on 3 sides, kind of created by the Renton School District if it were to move into our school district, and in itself would sort of be an island.
Yeah, and I would add to that the fact that, and it's mentioned in here that this would probably cause the Issaquah School District to have to add a bus route and a bus driver. Those are very hard to come by. But I did want to address the point that was made somewhere that why do we even have this process? Because it can never happen. We have had requests in the past that we have approved. They've been smaller in nature. They've had specific issues around them, but these do sometimes get approved. And because district boundaries often precede the development of neighborhoods, it is not terribly uncommon to have a neighborhood or an HOA that divides itself among school districts. I'm aware of several in the ISD. So that does happen, and I understand the frustration, but it's a difficult thing to do.
And I think it's just the nature of having a neighborhood that's on the boundaries. All of us have boundaries, and where is that line drawn? I actually remember looking at those houses when we went to purchase our current one and found out the ones I was looking at was on the Renton side. Well, obviously as a school board member, I wouldn't be able to move there. But that's just the nature. We have a bus stop that we have students that stand on the property, on the sidewalk in front of Hazen High School to be picked up, to walk over, to be driven over to Liberty. So it's just the nature of so many of our schools are on borders, near borders, as a nature. And so it does make sense that someone would be frustrated. It's like, I can see the school, it's right over there. Why can't I go there? So it's a frustrating point. But if we would be setting a precedent that when would we stop trying to move our boundaries throughout. And it does have ramifications. Renton's gone after a bond to be able to create an elementary school based on the idea that those houses would be there as part of that, the payment back for that bond. So to begin doing that, would people leave us to go to Lake Washington, and when does it stop? Or Bellevue. So I think it does. The one time I recall was a reasonable request where there was one property in which half the property was in one school district and half was in the other. Their home was situated in that district, the other district, but their driveway went through us. So they literally had to travel 5 miles to get to their bus stop. So that's the reason there is this type of idea of how do you manage if there's property lines or boundaries that don't make sense. To me, that was a boundary that doesn't make sense. This is a clear boundary. It was set before the neighborhood was set there.
Yeah, I would say similarly, we have properties that back up to Cascade Ridge Elementary, and those students are bused to Snoqualmie Valley. It happens.
And it is to your point, it is a challenge because there are many schools that are on the boundary. And so it does lead to the people being close to it, but yet not in our school district and not attending that school. And not that we always try to put our schools out there, but sometimes it's the only place we can purchase property to build schools.
Any other comments or questions, Superintendent? Okay, if we're finished with discussion, we have a motion that's on the table and it's been seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None? It passes.
I was just going to add one other thing is that the Renton School District will be going through a similar process at their December 14th meeting. So if that's helpful information for anybody.
Thank you. Okay, we move on to legislative matters. And so we don't have Director Gallagher with us this evening. Any updates from you, Director Emeraldo?
We are beginning to prepare for the National School Board Association's Advocacy Institute in Washington, D.C. at the end of January. I think much of the information that Director Gallagher has gathered around special education will be at the forefront. We'll be given homework. We'll probably also be coming with additional items. I'm the chair of the NSBA's Public Advocacy Committee of the board. So I was able to see much of what we're planning on doing. And I was surprised that they didn't have any homework around special education. I'm like, how is this? Because NSBA does not have a prioritization process like WASDA does. I didn't quite get my committee members there to do it for ourselves. Like we should then set what it is, but we are talking about what are the top 3 issues, what are the data that we need. So I was glad to be in that position to be able to say, no, we're going to focus on special education and IDEA. One thing I was very surprised to learn, though, is that Senator Murray will no longer be the chair of the Senate Help Committee, which is it Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. Instead, it will be Senator Bernie Sanders will be the chair of the committee starting in January. So that will be a kind of a less leverage for us. It was always good to be able to go and see the chair of the Education Committee.
Thank you. Any additional comments on legislative matters from you, Superintendent?
No, thank you. I had shared about our visit with activities with local legislators earlier with my visit to Apollo and Representative Steve Berquist. So that was my update earlier.
Awesome. I will add one. I normally don't have any in this area, but I'm very grateful for the flexibility on the start time for this meeting so that I could participate in the Washington State Commission on African American Affairs that I was invited to, that started earlier this evening. So I was able to participate in the first hour. They had a gathering of Black elected officials across the state as a way to do outreach of electeds. It was actually pretty fascinating. I met judges and city council members and school board members. I think I'd met all the school board members before, but also, a number of electeds across the state. And so I think that is a forum that'll continue into the future. And so it was great to be able to learn more about their advocacy efforts and how they might engage electeds across the state. So we'll go on to announcements and correspondence. Are there any announcements or correspondence to be shared that haven't already been shared with Diane?
I'll share that sometimes there are additional comments that do come forward, either in the moment when we've sort of just passed them in a public comment, or otherwise that people might want to continue to give feedback or input on. So we always encourage the public to write to the board to express those points of view. And I know that's something that I know that each board member reads as do I.
Thank you for that. Okay, if nothing else on announcements and correspondence, we're off to calendaring. I don't have anything on calendaring, Diane.
Oh, and us.
Does it, Anna?
Yes, because I had made a note of this, that the last board meeting, we collectively decided to tentatively have a town hall on January 10th. And so now it's our time to go ahead and just officially calendar that. So I move the board hold a town hall on January 10th, 2023 at 7 p.m. at the admin building.
Second.
Any conversation about that? Need for adjustment? All right, well, how about we take the vote on that one? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any against? Okay, so moved. We're there. Did you have any other items on your?
That was the only one I had, Diane, unless you had anything else we needed to do, because we already did the retreat days that we had scheduled.
Yes, the only thing I'd mention is that for the SIP meetings, there was talk about changing the time, but we're going to leave it the way it is because if you flip it to any other time, then it's going to affect somebody.
Okay.
So we're just going to leave it the way it is. So I'm going to change it from a hold to a
Right, and we've already calendared those.
Correct.
We've
Yeah,
calendared
okay.
them. They
all
just say
calendared.
hold. So I'm
Right.
going to
Okay, got it.
send an
Thank you.
update.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And with